Hello, my name is Jeff Babson. I am a birding guide and eco tour guide for a wide range of subjects, including birds, obviously, butterflies, dragonflies, moths, and I have been a part of the Southwest Wings Festival, both the Spring Fling and the main festival, for probably 10 or 12 years now, and it's a great time every time. And so today I'm going to give you a brief talk about getting started in moth. And in the last probably 10 years or so, moths have become increasingly on the radar for watchable wildlife. And we're going to talk today about some really simple things that you can do to get started in watching moths. And you can do this all from your yard. Even if you live in the middle of a city, you will have moths in your yard. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the equipment that you need and books that you could use and websites and things of that nature. But essentially, it's an introduction into the wild, wacky, nighttime world of moths. And so the moth on the title slide is a moth we get here in southern Arizona, usually during the monsoon season. It's called the Western Imperial Moth. It's in the wild silk moth family, the Saturniidae, which includes things like the Cecropia moth, the Luna moth, the Io moth. Some of these sort of rock stars among the moth world are in this group. And this thing has a wingspan of probably about 3.5 to 4 inches. So it's a pretty big thing. So this is just an example of things that you can find if you start to get interested in moths. So why moths? I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but why are people starting to get interested in moths? Well, some people have been interested in moths for hundreds of years. So, but they're a very diverse group in terms of number of species. There are estimated to be up to maybe 500,000 moth species in the world. There's a little over 10,000 bird species, to give you a comparison. So there's a lot more moths than birds. Likewise, for butterflies, there's a little over 18,000 species of butterfly. And yet again, there's way more species of moth than butterflies. So what that basically tells us is there's a lot of chances for discovery. Pretty much every time you go out, you'll find new moths. They're very beautiful animals, actually. Some of them are really brightly colored or very strikingly patterned. Others are very well camouflaged, and they might look sort of drab to us, being in browns or grays or black and that sort of thing. But they're exquisitely adapted to blend in so that predators can't find them and eat them. So if you look at it from that standpoint, they are beautiful as well. And they run the size in North America from as big as a hand on a grown adult to as small as a pinhead. So there's a lot of variation, not only in color and pattern and such, but there's also a huge range in size. As everyone knows, most moths come out at night. Not all of them. Some of them come out during the daytime and often can be fairly brightly colored and will visit flowers, some of them, just like butterflies do. So if you see an animal that flies to a flower and think it's a butterfly, it may not be, maybe a moth. But most of the moths come out at night. So that's why, for the most part, mothing is sort of a nighttime activity. And the last bullet item is sort of the key one, I think. It's simple. It pretty much says it all right there. You can turn on your porch light and check it after dark and see what shows up. That's all you have to do to start. But if you get more into it or more serious about it, there's other things you can do. And so you can go further afield. You don't have to be only at your house. You can go maybe on a camping trip or up into the mountains for a night and still attract moths. So we're going to talk about that. So the easiest thing is just to turn on your lights. Any type of light will work. an incandescent bulb, fluorescent bulbs, ultraviolet lights, which are also often called black lights, which are not actually black. It's kind of a purple color. Mercury vapor lights are really bright. They're the ones often used like in shopping centers. They're very, very bright. And those are the mercury vapor lights, especially, are more for the if you get more serious about it, because they have their own sort of things to consider when dealing with those. But any light will work. The only ones that don't work are the bulbs you can get at a store that says anti-bug or something like that. They usually are kind of a yellow color. Any other type of bulb that you have in your outdoor patio fixture will work. It will attract some moths. The moth vision is more sensitive to the black light and mercury vapor end of the spectrum, and that's why a lot of mothers use those lights. They'll just bring in more variety, but any bulb, except as long as it's not one of those anti-insect bulbs, any other bulb will also bring in moths. And the moths will come if you have your patio light. They'll come in and they'll land on the wall. Or maybe if you have other things around there, they'll, like plants near that corner, they'll land on the plants, and you can, you can study them, you can take photos of them. Sometimes people just like to know what's there. You can start to identify them if you like, and we're going to talk about identifying that. It's a little bit different than, say, identifying birds, for example. But the key thing is, all you have to do to attract moths is turn on your lights. That's it. That's how simple it is. You can leave them on, as long as you want in the evening. I try to remember to turn them off before I go to bed, because then the birds will find a buffet table waiting for them, and the things you basically attracted them to their demise at that point. But if you turn your light on for a few hours, you'll get moths for sure, and other insects, things like beetles and other things as well. So this is what I have in my yard. This is in the fixture. There's a black light you could get like at a big box store. They cost a couple of bucks. You take out the incandescent bulb or fluorescent bulb, put that in there, turn your light on. Now this is what's an example of a light trap, and that's used to collect the insects. And what they do is it's basically a mesh collapsible hamper. You could buy at a department store for like under $5. And then in the bottom are a bunch of cardboard egg cartons that gives the cartons give the moths a place to hide once they fly in there. And the good thing about a trap like this is you can turn your light on and go to bed. You can get some sleep, because the moths are going to be somewhat protected. As you can see on the left, there's a couple that landed on the wall, and those are kind of out in the open. But the vast majority of the moths that are attracted will go into the trap, and then you can sort of look at them at your leisure the next day, so you don't have to be up until the wee hours of the morning. And this is looking down. You see all the egg cartons in there. There's a few bugs. This was in early April. So April is the month where a lot of the moths are just starting to sort of wake up. And so the diversity will build as we go through the summer. And so there's not as many species available right now. But if we were to do this in July or August, and assuming we had some rain, then this pretty much would all be covered with moths. And it would be, you could spend all day trying to sort through your catch, and then you have to put it up again. So this is nice, because what I do with these, I don't collect moths. So, if there's some in there that I want to get a photograph of, I'll put them in like a little container. The containers that the restaurants give out for like condiments, they're clear plastic things, work really, really well, because you can get a bunch of them. And so I'll tap them out of the egg carton into the container. Then I'll put the container in the fridge for a couple of hours, and that sort of cools their body temperature. And then it's best to photograph moths with natural light. So I'll put them in on a block, and I'll put them in the windowsill, and I'll take a photo of them under natural light, and it kind of comes out really well. And then I release them. So I use, this is a non-lethal trap. I mean, trap is almost a misnomer in this case, but just taking photographs. Some days you'll it's really weird. Some days, some nights I should say, are just over the top in the diversity, and your very next night there may not be very much. I have no idea why that happens, but it's no different really from birding or butterflies, where some days just seem to be better than others, and it just, in the case of moths, it's at night. Again, so this is the Lighttrap that I mentioned. These are basic. I wanted to show that you could use these things not only at your house, like the previous slides, but you also can take them into the field if you want. And again, basically all you need is a bulb of some sort. You need a fixture. If possibly you need a fixture. Some bulbs you can just plug in directly into a power source, and then you need a white sheet. So a cotton sheet that you can get at any department store, a power source, a light fixture, and then the bulb. Those are essential elements that you need to do this. And so this is the materials that I use. So the key part is the power source. That's this 12-volt battery down here. And then you charge your battery using the battery charger right here. And then you connect your battery to a power inverter, which is this thing with the 150 on the top. And it basically draws the power from the battery, and it's got outlets on it. And I plug my blacklight. I use this blacklight, just a basic fluorescent tube. And I plug in the tube into the inverter, and my light comes on. The sheet in the middle is the landing site for them. So that will go up. You can put them, but tie the rope between trees. The rope is up at the top, or you can use, if you're somewhere, there might be, say, a range fence or something like that. You don't need the rope. You just attach your sheet directly to whatever is available in the situation like that. But oftentimes, if you're out in more natural areas, you end up attaching your sheet to a rope that you then tie, like between two trees, for example. And then you have clothespins to attach the sheet to the rope. And then you have the bungee cord at the bottom for attaching basically your light to the rope. And then you need the tarp on the far right. You can use that or not use that if you don't like, but that just gives them the insects more space to land. And all of this together is actually fairly inexpensive. The most expensive thing is going to be your battery. I got the battery, the charger, and the inverter at a store called Batteries Plus. And all told, that was, I'll say, about $100. And then everything else together was probably $20. So, and I'm sure you can go online and get all this stuff for a cheaper price if you wanted to. But the benefit of something like this is it allows you to go away from your yard someplace else to study the moths there. And this is what it looks like. They got the sheet. This was in my backyard. It's attached to a range fence. And then the light's hanging down. You have your battery on the ground there. The inverter is behind the battery, and then the tarp. The only thing I will caution people because usually what you'll do is you'll set your sheet up, and you might go sit at a picnic table or something like that for a while, and maybe shoot the breeze with friends or family, or maybe have a cold beverage or two, and then maybe half hour later you go see what else has shown up. It's a very, very high stress activity, this mothing stuff. You spend a lot of time sitting down. And so, but when you do go back to the sheet, it's important to kind of watch where you're stepping, because sometimes on a good night, you'll get a lot of insects on the sheets, on the tarp as well. And you didn't want to attract them just so you could then step on them. So, but this is what a basic setup would look like if you were out in the field someplace. This is what it can be like. A friend of mine took this photo. This was several years ago at Peña Blanca Canyon, which is in Santa Cruz County, northwest of Nogales. So not too far from the border. And you can, and this is sort of later in the evening. This wasn't, you know, at like 9 p.m. This might have been midnight or something like that. But as soon as it starts to get dark or even dusk, you'll start to have insects show up. And, you know, we have, you know, a bunch of different silk moths on here. There's a bunch of different sphinx moths. So this is what, you know, on a good night, this is what it can look like. If you go to the tropics, the entire sheet is covered. There's like no white visible at all. It's pretty bananas. But this is, you know, this could be, you know, what your reward would be for setting up your equipment. Another thing you can do, if you don't want to go through all that, you can try baiting, or it's also called sugaring or painting trees. And in this case, what you do is you use a sugar-based bait to put onto trees with a paintbrush, and usually do it around dusk, maybe early evening. Let it sort of let those aromas from the bait sort of drift out there so the moths can find it. And this, the nice thing about this is not all moths are attracted to lights. And this is another method for attracting some of those moths. Also, even in places like New England, where I grew up, you'll have moths that are well known for being active when it's quite cold. And as a group, they're often referred to as the winter moths. And so by painting trees, even in the winter time, you'll have moths, even though, you know, you may have turned on your light and nothing showed up, but if you painted a tree, you might find a few. And that's because those particular moths are not all that interested in the light, but they really like the sugar and the alcohol. So there's sort of a general basic mixture. If you wanted to make a bait, stale beer, don't get the good stuff. You know, get the cheap stuff, pop a can or a bottle, leave it on your counter for, you know, half a day or something. Let it sort of get a little bit stale, and then you pour it into a container. Add brown sugar. You can add overripe fruit if you want. Bananas work really well, especially if you mash them up a little bit. But watermelon can work. You can add molasses if you like. Basically, what you want to create is a sort of a yeasty, fruity, sweet mixture. And once you make it, you'll want to let it ferment for a bit. So what I do is I put it in a container on the kitchen counter, but I don't put the lid on tightly. Just lay the lid on top, because the fermentation process will produce gases. And if the lid is on too tight, then your container is going to explode, and that's probably going to create quite a mess. So just leave the lid on loosely. And what a lot of mothers like to do is sort of experiment and try different recipes. And, you know, some people are really sort of secretive. They won't tell. They kind of guard their recipe as if it was a password to billions of dollars. But, you know, again, stale beer, brown sugar, and overripe fruit are sort of the key ingredients. And then you can mix and match with other things afterwards. And you can find online, there's a lot of different moth bait recipes you can find, but that's another way to attract moths. What I will say is you do not want to paint, like if you have a deck or a ramada or your house, because the bait may stain that surface. So, you know, find a tree in your yard, or maybe, you know, not too far away that you can easily check, and then you don't have to worry about having to repaint your house again. That's always a plus. So a big event coming up this year, as you can see by the logo, is the 10th annual National Moth Week. It runs from the 17th of July to the 21st, which I know is more than a full week, but us mothers get so excited we make our weeks longer. It's basically, their slogan is celebrating the beauty, life cycles, and habitats of moths. It's a global citizen science program, and so you can submit data that you have on the species that you've seen and the numbers that you've seen and that sort of thing. And the website right there, nationalmothweek.org, has all kinds of information about how to find moths, how to identify moths, things for kids, where events are. Pretty much, even though it's called National Moth Week, this is a global event. And so no matter where you are, what people do is they register their events. So, if you're in, say, Chicago, and it's especially if you're getting closer, because I'm sure many of the events aren't registered yet. But if it gets to be like July 10th and you're in Chicago, go to National Moth Week and you can find events near you that you can go attend. And that's true around all 50 states. And I think every Canadian province as well has these National Moth Week events. So it's something worth checking out. So again, July 17th to 25th, this is a big year. It's the 10th annual event of this sort. So I mentioned earlier, field guides are a very useful reference. However, moths are different than birds. And by that, I mean, you might have most birders know that, for example, gulls can be difficult to identify, or Empid flycatchers can be difficult to identify. But in the case of Empids, there's about 10 species in North America. In moths, you might have 150 species in North America that look pretty similar to each other. So it's a little bit different than identifying birds, and it's because of the diversity. It's because of many of them are similar to each other. Now, these 3 books are all excellent. The 2 in the Peterson Field Guide series were written by a team, Seabrook Leckie and David Beadle. They're working, or at least Seabrook is working on one for the moths of Western North America, but this is the one on the left is Northeastern North America, so New England, the Mid-Atlantic states, and the one in the middle is Southeastern North America, so Florida and the Deep South. So obviously those books geographically aren't great for Arizona, but they may be great for where you are. They may have a lot of the moths you see if you live in those areas, but there are some species that occur in those areas that we also get in Arizona. So they're still very useful references. The one on the right is a bigger book. It's not a field guide. It won't. There's no one on earth has pockets big enough, but it's the best we have at the moment for Western moths, and it's even with that being said, there's probably only 10 to 20% of Arizona's moths are included in that. But these guides will, even if you don't get an exact match for the moth you may have taken a photo of that came into your light last night, it will be a very good starting point. And you can say, okay, it looks sort of like this guy, but it's not exactly, because it differs because of whatever. Now you can go online and you can try to identify them, because there are online resources we're going to get to in a second. If you want the book in the middle and the book on the left are very, very good general introductions to moths. The one on the left, it's 2 gentlemen who are at the Natural History Museum in London, wrote that one. Basically, the complete guide to biology and behavior, that sort of sums it up. And you can look at the photos on there. Many of those are pretty spectacular insects. The one in the middle is written by John Himmelman, who lives in Connecticut. And that's some of the best nature writing I have ever read. It's a fantastic book. It's not a field guide. It just talks about, the life cycles of moths, some of the major families of moths, people who study moths, both in the past and today. It's really well done, and it's a very good introduction to moths. The one on the right is part of a series, The Moths of North America, and it's pretty technical. But if you start to really find that you're getting the moth bug, so to speak, that was a really bad pun, but if you're getting the moth bug, then that's a series that you might be interested in. And you can order from the Wedge Entomological Research Foundation, and you can find them online as well. And also many of those are now available as PDF files that you can download, so that will save you some money. And then like I said, there's other resources, and these are things online that you can submit photos to, and someone who's maybe more of a moth expert than you are can identify them for you. And now you know what this thing is, and so you're starting to build your foundation. The Moth Photographers Group is a great website. People all over North America are taking photos and submitting them. You can even, when you go to the website, they have a bunch of different tabs, but one of them is the plate series, and you click on the plate series, and then you can select a region, and you can select whatever state you're in, and that will give you all of the species that Moth Photographers Group have been submitted to them in your state, for example, or province. So that's a very nice feature. Bug Guide is sort of one of the beginning sort of citizen science things where you create a profile, which is free, takes you 10 seconds to do it, and you submit your photos and someone will identify them for you. Same is true of iNaturalist. iNaturalist is different from Bug Guide and Moth Photographers Group because it's everything. It's plants, it's animals, it's everything. So the good thing about that is if you're out, looking at moths and all of a sudden a moth shows up or a beetle shows up, you don't know what it is, you can get a picture of that guy, send it in, you can get a beetle identified as well. So, and many of you may be familiar with those sites. iNaturalist is just brilliant. And then the last one, a friend of mine, Bruce Walsh, he's at the University of Arizona. He has his own page, the Moths of Southeastern Arizona. I would just Google Moths of Southeastern Arizona because the URL is kind of long. But you can then search for, if you're in Southern Arizona, you can identify quite a few of the species that way. The only difference is that one tends to use pinned specimen, not how they would look in their natural condition. So that's the good thing too about the two field guides in the Peterson series by Seabrook Leckie and David Beadle, because those are in their natural resting positions. While that big Western moth book has pinned specimens, so their wings are out to the side. Then you have to do the mental gymnastics of what would this thing look like if the wings were folded like this guy is sitting at my light. So, it's not a huge hurdle, but it just is a little bit different. And so those are all very good places to get started. It's like I said, it's extraordinarily simple. All you really need is a light. And I will say you probably will get frustrated at first, just again, because of the diversity and because so many of them look alike. But with practice, just like you didn't know birds right away, you didn't know wildflowers right away, it takes a little while. So be patient and just keep plugging away. And if nothing else, it's a good way to spend cool desert evenings outside. And while you're doing this, you might be seeing bats fly overhead. You'll be being serenaded by owls and nightjars. It's just a magical time. So I hope that you like this little presentation. I hope it may have inspired you to give moths another look. They're not all closed, devouring, crop eating pests. Many of them are exceptionally beautiful. Some of them are pollinators. And if nothing else, they're food for bats and other things. So I really hope that you enjoy this presentation. Thank you all very much for your time. And again, my name is Jeff Babson, and I hope to see you at Southwest Wings, if not this year, then coming up in future years, because we are going to be doing moth nights. So it's a great time doing something you maybe never thought you would ever do. But anyway, thank you again for your time, and I hope to see you out in the field.